All aboard! Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, football fans of all ages, I am Beast Mike. You have now arrived at my train of thought. This year, I'm going to switch it up a little bit more when it comes to the power rankings. It's time for them every week. Every Wednesday is when I will drop them. Here's how they're going to go for this season. So, my inspiration came from a site called D Squires. I'm going to post a link below to where I truly got my inspiration for this year's tier list. And I wanted to look at Amtrak train stations, and I thought about some of the least visited. I thought about some of the most visited. I decided to go with 4 of the most visited stations, at least by the most visited by state is where I'm going with this. I will explain which station is in which tier as we go along. So here we go. The Fulton, Kentucky Zombie tier. This was the worst of the best, or least of the worst, if you will. This was the station that was the most visited in Kentucky, but the least visited amongst the stations in question. Here are the teams in this tier in ascending order. New Orleans, not that bad. I thought the Saints were kind of going to get blown out in a lot of these games this year, and in this one, they actually played admirably well. They were a respectable team against Arizona. Arizona maybe didn't finish their food or played with their food a little bit too much. Ultimately, the Saints are going to probably be in this position somewhat in some games where they just aren't good enough to win these games. And I think for the Saints' sake, that's not the worst thing in the world. And again, go 2-15, get you the first or second pick in the draft your QB of the future. It's probably that simple for New Orleans. New York Giants. Russ is cooked. He got swarmed on Sunday against the Commanders, and to be honest, it was not pretty. It was legitimately rough, and in the Giants' sake, they just could not get things done at all on the defensive side of the ball, on the offensive side of the ball, as well as the defensive. And it took a little bit for the Commanders to truly finish them off, but they were able to. And once Deebo Samuel scored, it was a wrap when it came to them actually winning this game. It's probably going to be like this quite a bit. If you got a competent pass rush and you're playing the Giants, I pray for Russell Wilson and eventually Jackson Dart or Jameis Winston. Carolina, Bryce regressed again. What happened here? Weren't we supposed to see Bryce Young take another step forward considering how good he was towards the end of last season? What happened here? I get it. Jacksonville's got 2 good pass rushers. But even then, it shouldn't have been this. It shouldn't have been this bad, this ugly, this ineffective on both sides of the ball, but especially the offense. It shouldn't have been this. And maybe Carolina's just going to go back to where they were, which is really terrible, and they're kind of stuck. What do you do now if you're the Panthers if things continue at this way? I'm going to ask the same question for Miami. Team-wide disaster. 1 through 53, all of the coaches, all of it. It was all awful. Now, we'll see if this is an indication of this team's season or if it's just a one-off. But either way, it was an abject disaster in Indianapolis where absolutely nothing went right. Devon A. Chen and a couple of the offensive linemen, as I mentioned in the recap aside, mostly. Other than that, you guys are exempt from this. Other than that, it was just an ugly day, and we need to see more from this Dolphins unit if Miami is going to do anything productive this year. Their next opponent is New England. Very concerning performance. Now, I expect New England to be here. I expect the Patriots to be in this tier quite a bit this season, simply because I don't think their roster is good enough. I just don't think their roster, not named Drake May or Christian Gonzalez, and the latter's got a hamstring injury now and is looking questionable to play this Sunday. I'm just not seeing it. I don't get the hype here. I don't. Not named Drake May and Mike Vrabel. To be honest, it just felt like it was only a matter of time for the Raiders to capitalize off of New England's inefficiency and just take over the game. And that's effectively what happened here. Drake May and company just weren't good enough to take the game from the Raiders. New England will have their days, I'm sure, this season. I just don't think it's going to be too many of them. Maybe at the most 6 or 7 of them where they win and they actually look like a team that's turning around. I just don't buy it from them for this season as a whole. Cleveland, no business losing. To be honest, that's how I feel about their performance on Sunday against the Bengals. They had no business losing this game. They were beating up Joe Burrow and made the game incredibly ugly and somehow lost because, of course, the Browns find a way to lose games like this, where a 36-yard field goal, if that's made, then you just turn Myles Garrett and company loose, and the game's over. Joe Burrow catches a beating, catches another L against Cleveland, and the Browns win and humiliate the Bengals again. We didn't get there because of the missed kick, and it's really a shame for the Browns because they deserve better and should have had this game won. Tennessee, roster needs work. To be honest, if the Titans roster were better, they beat the Broncos. With the way Denver played and all the turnovers they committed, if Tennessee's roster were a little bit better, they probably beat Denver, considering how bad they made Bo Nix look and how decent Cam Ward was. Ward got us welcome to the NFL moments, no question. But he didn't look like he was completely out of place either. The roster is just not good enough, and it won't be good enough probably for another year. I don't expect it to be, and I don't think they do either. And the New York Jets, Freaky Friday team. So coming into this season, I think we all expected the Jets to be good on defense, really bad on offense, which will probably lead to 5 or 6 wins. As it turns out, the offense was great. Justin Fields was outstanding, not just with the legs, but with the arm. He actually played really well. And Garrett Wilson did well, and Breece Hall had some big runs. And yet, their defense got absolutely picked apart by Aaron Rodgers. Now, prime Aaron Rodgers do that to a lot of teams, but this Aaron Rodgers, 41-year-old Rodgers, absolutely slaughtering the Jets was not on my bingo card. Even this Aaron Rodgers. For the Jets defense to get worked like that is absolutely stunning. And I think is that an indication of things to come? We'll see. But for now, it's a little surprising that it happened this way. We'll see what the Jets will be next week. And now to the games of interest. As I mentioned before, there will be 2 games in each tier, or at least with at least one team represented in each tier that I will talk about their game of interest here. Let's talk about the Giants and Cowboys. And in the case of the Giants, it is your really bad offensive line versus a Dallas Cowboy defensive line that could not get home. Which wins out here? Can Malik Neighbors get busy against Deron Bland or Trevion Diggs? And then there's Russell Wilson. I think he's mega cooked, as I just explained. Is he, though? We need to know this. We'll need to know more information on this. What do you do against Dak and company, who played really well against the Eagles? They just couldn't find a way to get it done. These are things that will need to be answered and answered immediately. And then there's Patriots-Dolphins, a team that I think nobody has faith in Miami versus a team that some people have faith in when it comes to New England. I don't buy the faith for the Patriots. I do kind of sort of buy that the Dolphins can improve and can bounce back because you can't be much worse than what happened on Sunday in Indianapolis. But I think in Miami's case, the proof needs to be seen. And in Miami's case, they have to show themselves to be better than what they were because you can't be much worse. This is a game that New England normally loses. But this is a place that Mike Vrabel usually wins. And he usually does well against Tua. So, is New England's roster good enough to deal with Miami? And can they get home and cause chaos for Tua? The whiteout in Miami will be interesting. They did this last year against the Patriots, and it worked to resounding success, both on the field and in the stands. Will history repeat itself there? Next up, the Monkey's Paw tier will be stationed in Birmingham, Alabama. This was the 10th least used tier amongst the states that were represented. And what I mean by this is obviously amongst the states here, Birmingham, Alabama had the 10th lowest total. So that's where this tier will reside. Chicago will be the first team in it. Fourth quarter disaster. For 45 minutes, it looked like the Bears had this on lock. They had J.J. McCarthy in shambles. That was pick 6, was very telegraphed. And it looked like things were going to be really easy for a Bears team that needed to show that things were changing with Caleb Williams thanks to Ben Johnson and company. And then the fourth quarter happens and the defense self-destructs. And Caleb Williams does nothing to steer the ship back to where it needed to be. He almost threw a pick 6 himself because Andrew Van Ginkel reads screens outstandingly well and had the ball a little bit more air under it. It's a pick 6 by AVG. In the case of Chicago, that was a really alarming performance to look that rough against a Viking team that we didn't know what they would be. And now that we know that Minnesota could be good and Chicago may just be mid, it's not looking great for Caleb and company. Houston, Stroud in trouble. And I mean this because their offensive line looks ugly. I'm going to make Stroud only got sacked twice. It felt like he was under siege for a lot of this game. And to be honest, it's probably going to be like that for a lot of teams if you have a competent pass rush. The Rams have one, and Tampa Bay might have one, which might not be good for C.J. Stroud and company. Then they might need a little bit more from Nick Chubb to take some pressure off of him, and they need to hold the fort down for Joe Mixon before he can return. It's just a really rough performance, and it's a shame because the defense actually played pretty well, and the defense almost helped them win that game. They just need a little bit more from the offense. It just never came. Rather unfortunate there. Seattle, vintage Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold will give you some decent highlights and some decent stats or plays, things of that nature. He seems to do that from time to time. But when the lights are brightest and the money truly comes on the table and it's truly time to go win a game and time to go to work, this is when the real Sam Darnold shows himself. And he wasn't even strip sacked by Nick Bosa. Instead, it was just he dropped the ball. That's an ugly way to go out and an ugly way to lose a game that you probably shouldn't have lost. And to be honest, it probably never should have gotten to Darnold dropping the ball and fumbling. I can't believe that pass wasn't picked off. The go-ahead touchdown by Brock Purdy. I legitimately can't believe that pass wasn't picked. And the fact that it wasn't was just, it seems like sheer luck for the Niners. And this was a pretty rough loss by Seattle. And to be honest, an avoidable one too. Las Vegas. Good Geno performance. And it wasn't just Geno. This was all in all a pretty good performance by the defense, solid performance by the Raiders receivers in Ashton Jeanty and Brock Bowers. It was all in all a really solid performance. They didn't do anything incredibly dumb. They were just well coached by Pete Carroll and company, and they did what they were supposed to do, which was if you got an opponent down, finish him. And they eventually did. Good work by the Raiders. Dallas didn't look awful. The Cowboys did not get blown out, which is maybe in part because Jalen Carter was ejected because Dak outsmarted him, but it was in part because they simply played pretty well. They really ran the ball efficiently with CeeDee Lamb. They protected Dak relatively strong and impressively. The only solace here, the only bad thing that happened here was their run defense was still ugly. It was still bad. And they could not get the ball to CeeDee Lamb, or really, CeeDee Lamb couldn't hold on to the ball. Dak did what he was supposed to in getting the ball to CeeDee with golden opportunity after golden opportunity in the fourth quarter. CeeDee just couldn't catch it. And this game, and I think this narrative, are entirely different had CeeDee Lamb caught a couple of those passes. Or, to be honest, had Miles Sanders not fumbled at the Eagles 11 after that long run he had where he got caught by Zach Bond. Atlanta, shock coup miss. Yes, the falconing is real. Sure. Okay. But I don't think this is falconing. I think this is more so just surprising that Younghoe Koo legitimately missed. I think that this was a very good game with Atlanta. I thought Bijan played well. I thought Drake London with the touchdown was nice. Mike Penix was pretty solid. I thought the Falcons looked pretty good. They had an okay pass rush for once. It's just a surprise that Younghoe Koo missed the field goal that he normally makes. That's really all there is to it here. There was no falconing. At least not here. Arizona, that will do. You're not going to get away with that performance against the upper echelon teams. You will get away with it against the bad teams and the teams that are probably in this tier to some extent. But Arizona did what they needed to do. They did play with their food, it seemed, but when they actually had to get a stop, they made sure to not self-destruct. And sometimes that's all you need here. Arizona, take your win and fly. And Cincinnati, run with win. This was not the air raid I expected, that anyone expected. I think we were all thinking that the Bengals are going to have to hang 30 to 35 a game and move forward. This time, they didn't have to. Instead, it was just, okay, hang in there. And then we got the mistake of the missed kick by Cleveland, and that's effectively what won them the game. Joe Burrow took a horrible beating, and the offensive line may have regressed a bit, which is not great considering you're facing some good pass rushes in the AFC. Still, the Bengals will take this win gladly, as ugly as it was, and just run out of Cleveland with the W back to their humble abode in the Queen City. Now let's get to the games of interest in the Monkey's Paw tier. We're going to go with Pittsburgh and Seattle, a matchup of a well-coached defense and, after last week, what could be a very dynamic offense. Pittsburgh's offense looked outstanding, as I've mentioned. Seattle's defense is generally good and very well coached. Mike Macdonald, Mike Tomlin, these are two pretty productive coaches. I like what I'm seeing from both of them. And on the opposite side of things, DK Metcalf's return to Seattle as well. I should also explain that. And on the opposite side of things, we get to see what the Steeler defense can do now that there's some concerns about them after they got lit up the way they did. Can Sam Darnold do likewise to them what Justin Fields did? Going to need to see that. And also, the Steelers' pass rush against Seattle's offensive line, which can be shaky at times. Can Pittsburgh's pass rush cause some havoc and get home against Darnold? And of course, Ben Johnson's return to Detroit. Bears-Lions. And thus far, this separation looked ugly for both teams, where the Bears got the great first drive and not much else after it, and the Lions got absolutely nothing done in Green Bay. So the question, I guess, is kind of simple. Which wins out? Will the Lions, who usually do great at home, get things together against the Bears? Or will it be a matter of Chicago getting this right with Ben Johnson, who knows that personnel so well in Detroit? Let's go to the Wilmington, Delaware playoff tier. This is the 10th most used station in the United States. And we're going to start with San Francisco. More injuries, because of course the Niners are going to have more injuries. We already see it with Brock Purdy, who had the injury last week and is looking real dicey to play against New Orleans this week. That's not great because we just talked about this and how the Niners' injury situation was awful last year, and we need to know if the Niners can be healthy as a team. We already saw George Kittle had to deal with the injury last week that took him out of the Seahawks game after he scored the tutty. How healthy will he be? And the rest of that team, for that matter. The Niners survived and advanced, and they did just enough to win. They saved themselves from a loss, but what do you do without Brock Purdy if Purdy can't play? We'll see what happens with them in New Orleans. Detroit, sound alarms. That looked bad, and I get it. Jared Goff away from home can be dicey depending on where he's going. He's always looked kind of dicey against decent pass rushes. And as we saw the results here, Green Bay's got now a supercharged one with Micah Parsons in it. And then the defense looked real dicey. They had no answer for Jordan Love at all. And it was just an ugly, ugly performance. Can they get right now that they got some home cooking against Chicago? We need to see that. Jacksonville, pretty easy win. There's really not much to say here. The Jaguars basically didn't crash the car like I mentioned yesterday. And in their case, they just played really solid, well-coached football. That's all this was. They didn't do anything ridiculous. They didn't do anything crazy. Travis Etienne had a very good game, and we move. That's pretty much all this was. Can the Jaguars get to 2-0 against another feline in the Bengals? We will see this on Sunday. Indianapolis, mostly perfect game. Not getting the shutout aside, there's really not much more you could have done if you're Indianapolis. I could have also used the words honor to Jim Irsay because that feels like that's what they did here. Daniel Jones was tremendous. There's no other way to say it. The offensive line did an excellent work against Miami's defensive line. The Colts pass rush and blitz were tremendous in throwing off Tua's timing and tremendous with clogging the lanes in the middle of the field where Tua usually dices teams up. They were basically flawless, and there's not much else to say here. We'll see if Indy's performance was real or not on Sunday against this next opponent, Denver, carried by defense, which we kind of expected the Broncos to be, of course, because their defense was top tier, and Bo Nix is at least a good game manager. Probably not too much else, but at the very least a good game manager. He wasn't even that on Sunday. He was awful against Tennessee. Their defense straight carried them to a win because they did enough to Cam Ward to allow Bo Nix to save himself and at least get a touchdown to Cortland Sutton for fantasy purposes. Anyway, Denver, you take your ugly win and go to the next game against the Colts because otherwise it was no bueno. Pittsburgh, vintage Aaron Rodgers. Like I mentioned for the Jets, this was not on the bingo card, to be honest, at least not from 41-year-old Rodgers, where he absolutely diced up the Jets' defense. What was also not on the bingo card was the Steeler defense looking as bad as they looked, because that was concerning. They had minimal answers for Justin Fields, which, considering they had him on their team last year, a little surprising. At least until the very end when Jalen Ramsey absolutely laid the wood to Garrett Wilson. That was quite nice to see that. Tampa Bay, another Buckeye receiver. Because, of course, it feels like in the next 10 years or so, every team's going to have an Ohio State receiver on it, because the Buckeyes are legitimately good at basically being a pipeline for wide receivers in the NFL. They are a wide receiver, you don't get it confused. In this case, it's Emeka Egbuka, who is proving himself to be a really good first-round pick. He had a great preseason, as a lot of us know, and then in this game here against Atlanta, he proved himself worthy and had a big-time touchdown at the very end to be the go-ahead score and eventual game-winning score. He also had a different touchdown earlier in the game. He could be next up to be along the lines of a great receiver school that the Buckeyes had, and is it possible that he's going to be the one to take the torch from Mike Evans as the best receiver in Tampa Bay when Mike Evans decides to give up the torch in like 2040 or something? Anyway, Minnesota. Football McCarthyism. If this is the J.J. McCarthy we're going to get, then no team is safe and no lead is safe. The first three quarters were not good, as I mentioned with Chicago. McCarthy looked out of sorts. That pick six was awful. It was no bueno. Now, granted, they're doing a lot of this without Jordan Addison, but it just wasn't very good overall on the field for three quarters. Then the fourth quarter happens. Randy Moss gets on the Manning cast, and the Vikings absolutely shred the Bears. And this was in large part thanks to J.J. McCarthy dicing up their defense, which was rather shocking and really impressive, to be honest. He looked really composed and calm when the money was on the table the entire fourth quarter for the Vikings, who were down multiple scores. This was really good. If fourth quarter McCarthy is the McCarthy we're going to see going forward, Minnesota picked the right quarterback in that draft last year. Let's talk about the games of interest in this tier. We've got Falcons, we got Vikings. We got the Sunday Night Football game this week here. Mike Penix showed himself to be solid. The Falcons offense showed himself to be somewhat productive here. And against a Viking defense that's going to send pretty much everybody in Minnesota and everyone left from the Minnesota Twins. I think they're going to really be a good test for Penix and see what he can do against a Viking defense that is going to be absolutely relentless and coming for him. Conversely, offensively, J.J. McCarthy against the Falcons. Can the Falcons' edge rush get better and continue to improve? I would like to see if the Falcons' defense cause some havoc for J.J. McCarthy, make him sweat a little bit, similar to what the Bears tried to do and eventually failed at as we got towards the end of the game. A.J. Terrell versus Justin Jefferson, a matchup I think we're all looking forward to. And as I mentioned before, kind of, sort of, Colts-Broncos. Is the Colts' performance fake? Is it real? Is Daniel Jones legitimately good with a team with structure? And then there's Denver's defense. They carried hard last week against Tennessee. Will they have to carry again against the Colts? What will Indy's pass rush and blitz pickups or blitz packages do against Bo Nix? Will Lou Amarillo have another masterclass of a game plan against Bo Nix? We will need to see this. And now let's get to the New York City / Moynihan train station title tier. If you have not been to Moynihan Station, I highly recommend it. It is gorgeous. It is absolutely beautiful in pretty much every way, shape, form, and fashion. There's also Penn Station across the street that connects to it quite nicely, but we always talk about Moynihan here. Let's just talk about Moynihan. Anyway, let's get to the teams in this tier. Washington didn't waste food. They didn't have to do but too much, but at the same time, they also did what they needed to do. Good performance by Jaden Daniels. We got a solid day from Deebo Samuel. The Commanders' pass rush did their thing against Russell Wilson. All in all, they didn't play with their food, and they eventually ate it, which is what you need to do against the bad teams. Kansas City, a surprising loss. Now, I say this not because of the way the Chargers played or the way the Chiefs played. I say this because this is a game that normally Kansas City wins. Instead, they didn't. And they didn't because the Chargers slightly outplayed them. It's a little surprising to say that, but it's the truth. Now they have their second straight loss, which is something that we don't normally say. And they also have a lot of concerns in the wide receiver room. Xavier Worthy's got the injury, and we're still going to miss Rashee Rice for a month and change with his suspension. What can Pat Mahomes do with this receiving core now that it's obviously going to be shorthanded for even more periods of time? At least Travis Kelce looks solid. LA Rams, Stafford 60K. Congrats to Matt Stafford on 60,000 yards passing. He has built up a lot of yards in Detroit, obviously got the title in St. Louis, and continues to sling it well. Puka Nacua bled his own blood, and then he'd come back for Houston's blood. He played really well in this game. Kyren Williams scored his annual touchdown because, of course, he does. It must be good for good parlays. And the Rams did their thing in terms of pass rush to get home against C.J. Stroud and company. What can the Rams do for an encore against the Titans? Another AFC South opponent. But this time they're on the road in Nashville. Baltimore, own biggest op. I think the Ravens are the most talented team in the NFL, 1 through 53. I love this roster. They're tough when they need to be. They have two incredibly dynamic players at quarterback and at running back, obviously. Zay Flowers has shown himself to be a really good wide receiver 1. The offensive line is physical. The defensive line is physical. The secondary is better with Jair Alexander. And yet, they always seem to get in their own way. And they can't help themselves but get in their own way. That's how they seem to lose these big games. And no team is worse in the NFL, or at least less trustworthy with a double-digit lead than this one. I don't know how. I don't know why that is. Yet the Ravens seem to maybe keep their foot off the gas or take their foot off the gas when they have a big lead late in games. There's no way they should have lost this one. And this, if they don't get the 1 seed, you found out why on Sunday night. Although some of that was some real crazy luck with Josh Allen getting some super help with the clock at the end of the first half, and then the bobble to Keon Coleman and with a touchdown, and of course the Derrick Henry fumble, which you don't normally see every day. Baltimore should be fine, but this is a loss that's going to sting. LA Chargers, Herbert's finest performance. The last time we saw Justin Herbert in that playoff game against Houston, we probably saw the worst performance of Justin Herbert's career. He had 4 NOs, and it was an abject disaster from the word go when the ball wasn't going to Ladd McConkey. It was otherwise straight up trash. But this time, this was a very good performance. And he played really well against a Chiefs team that he had to see if he could get a win against. Very impressive. Quentin Johnson had hands, which is also good. He also had the incredibly reliable Keenan Allen, because Keenan Allen is like that and has always been like that, to be honest. Just a really good receiver that the Chargers were able to get back. This was a really good statement win for Jim Harbaugh and company. John Harbaugh did not win, but it was a really good statement for Jim Harbaugh and company, and the Chargers may be on their way. Could they finally unseat Kansas City at the top of the AFC West? Last Friday was a really good first step into doing it. Green Bay, loud, powerful statement. Detroit has owned them at Lambeau for a couple years now. This was not one of those. This was a serious beating that Jared Goff took, because it felt like every few snaps, Goff was in the backfield and on his back. And it was a very impressive performance by the Packers pass rush. It wasn't even just the edge rushers. It was just a really good pass rush in general. We also got a really good performance from Jordan Love in the offense, where they looked very dynamic, crisp, and sharp pretty much the entire game. Let's face it, the Packers offense did their thing too. This game could not have gone much better for Green Bay against that opponent on that stage. This was incredibly impressive by the Packers. Are they the challengers to the Eagles? Are they the ones that are going to be the Kings of the North once again? We'll need answers to these questions, but so far, that was a good statement. Buffalo, what a heist. Buffalo had no business winning this game, let's be honest. Not with the way the Ravens ran on them. Not with the way Lamar was cooking with Zay Flowers. Not with the way that, for a lot of this game, Buffalo was horribly outplayed. This had every reason to be, okay, a Baltimore statement win. Buffalo may come back next week against the Jets. They'll get to 1-1. We move forward. That's all, in theory, this was going to be. And then the Ravens self-destructed. And all of a sudden, it's not what it should have been. It becomes Josh Allen being in God mode and now hailed as the best player and quarterback in football, which he might be now. As for Buffalo, they did their thing around Josh Allen. James Cook was productive. He got the touchdown early to Kincaid. And then Buffalo found ways to win. They continue to find ways to win, I should say. Whether they have to score 20 points or they have to score 40, Buffalo seems to find ways to win in the regular season. But Philadelphia will top this power ranking. Concerned about corners. If there's a fly in the ointment for the Eagles, now, I'm not going to go completely off on Jalen Carter, and I think the fine and punishment is perfectly fine. He's basically served a suspension. Okay, understandable. I'm not going to go off on that here. I think it's been done, and I think it's okay. My concern here is about their cornerbacks, and not necessarily Quinyon Mitchell, though he got picked apart at times by CeeDee Lamb. It's a matter of their cornerback play aside from him. They did not look good against Dak Prescott. And when the Eagles' pass rush couldn't get home, Dak Prescott was able to do his thing, whether it was big completions or big penalties, because he drew several of those as well, especially when throwing to Pickens. It was not great. Now, sure, Kansas City's receiving core shouldn't pose the threat that Dallas's does. But if Kansas City's receiving core can get busy against those not named Quinyon Mitchell, even with Jalen Carter returning, even though the Chiefs' offensive line's good, I would be very, very concerned. The other elephant in the room here is about A.J. Brown and the fact that he only got one catch at the end of this game. That was a little surprising. Jahan Dotson came up big, sure. Devontae Smith came up big, sure. Dallas Goedert caught some passes. Okay, fine. Yes, all these things happened. All these things were fine. Losing Landon Dickerson may be a problem. Landon Dickerson went out right before the rain delay and didn't come back, and now it's a little bit of an issue considering his injury before the season began. It could be a bit of a problem there. I do want to see A.J. Brown get the ball a little bit more, and it'll be a little tougher for him this week because of Kansas City's secondary, but I do want to see A.J. Brown get a little bit more involved. As for Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts ran the ball pretty well. No complaints there. I'm just concerned about the secondary, and the lack of A.J. Brown was also a bit of a concern. Let's get to the games of interest in this tier, though. Commanders, Packers, tomorrow night. Jaden Daniels against an excellent pass rush. Jordan Love against what could be an emerging pass rush. And in general, an emerging Commander defense, who played really well last week. What are they going to do at Lambeau? And this is the first big stage for Daniels this year. We will find out, obviously, tomorrow night on Amazon, and I think it'll be a pretty entertaining game. I do want to see what Micah Parsons can do against Laramie Tunsil and company along that offensive line. Him and Rashawn Gary and Lucas Van Ness especially. And you already know the main event this week. It's the rematch of Super Bowl, the last 2 out of 3 Super Bowls, to be honest. And we saw the Eagles and Chiefs play an outstanding Super Bowl 57, and the Eagles basically bludgeoned the Chiefs in Super Bowl 59. Obviously, this game won't be as meaningful as those two. And probably not as meaningful as the last time the Eagles went to Kansas City, where the Eagles won that game, and they probably shouldn't have because it was a major drop at the end of the game by Kansas City. In any event, in theory, the Chiefs should not be 0-2. You would think this, right? But how is Pat Mahomes going to get the ball downfield to people not named Isaiah Pacheco or Travis Kelce? I do want to know how this is going to work. I do want to know if Hollywood Brown could do what he needs to against Quinyon Mitchell and company. I also want to know if George Karlaftis in the pass rush can cause some havoc against Jalen Hurts. And what does Vic Fangio have for an encore against Mahomes because of the way he terrorized them in the Super Bowl last year? So many questions that will need to be asked, and so many questions that will need answering, and we'll get answers on Sunday afternoon. So there you have it. That's this week's Power Rankings and Games of Interest. Tomorrow, there will be picks. You will see them on the Sports Lounge page. I will have a link here with these Power Rankings. You'll see that tomorrow, probably around, I want to say, 7:30. That's the time I'm shooting for when it comes to being finished up with my picks for Week 2. When it comes to the Railway Recap next Tuesday, Commanders Packers, you're going to be the first stop of my next train of thought.